As long as I can remember, I love to draw. I love to paint. I love paint by numbers. I remember my first box of 64 crayons. I thought I was in heaven. I drew cartoons. I drew elaborate battle scenes. I did caricatures of classmates. I sketched. I doodled. The margins of my papers were filled with ideas. I couldn't get enough. It was my passion, my life. And when I hit junior high, I was so excited because one of the classes that we had to take was art. Like I had to take it. But it was such a disappointment. The stuff we had to do, the projects, they seemed so stupid. I never seemed to get motivated to finish anything. It never came out the way the teacher wanted it or the way I saw it. There just wasn't enough time to finish. And then came the fateful day when she took me aside and said, "You know, Harold, I don't think you have a bit of artistic ability. You shouldn't spend your time wasting it away on art. Stick to your studies." I was devastated. But she was the teacher, so she obviously had to be right, and so I believed her. And I never drew again. A decade later, while traveling through Europe, I met a young artist. And she reintroduced me to the love of art as we saw some of the most brilliant masterpieces of history. And I remember in particular sitting one sunny afternoon in the Tyrolean Alps outside of Innsbruck. And I was marveling at the incredible wooden carvings. And I remarked, I wish I could do that. Kind of in a wistful way. And she looked at me and she said, "You can, if you try." I believed her. I came home and I bought a set of carving tools. Well, the rest is history. I had the same love affair with writing growing up. I wrote poems. I did song lyrics. I wrote what I've discovered were essays. I'd publish pieces in the elementary school newspaper. I just loved to write. And then I hit 8th grade English. And it was syntax and spelling and diagramming sentences and dangling participles and all kinds of things to go wrong and to worry about. I stopped loving writing. Mrs. Anderson literally beat it out of me. It was bad stuff. But fortunately, the next year, I moved on to senior high and met Miss Moore and later Mr. Keene. And they taught me again how to appreciate the power of words, to play with words, to see them as gifts, to think outside the box, to let the mind go. And so my life has been full of art and writing ever since. I got past the stumbling blocks only because there were building blocks along the way as well. It is that juxtaposition of the two that fills our lives. There are people who become stumbling blocks for us, situations that crush us, and others that build us up. And at different times in our lives, it seems like everybody's a stumbling block, and there aren't many building blocks out there. Even good things can become stumbling blocks. Take, for example, the law, the Torah, that God gave Moses, a design to shape community, healthy community, how to live together peacefully in a mutual upbuilding. And yet, by the time Jesus comes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they've created of the Torah, the law, a burden. It had become a stumbling block. Instead of building up, it was tearing down. It was separating people, male and female, clean and unclean, Jew and Greek. There was no sense of community any longer. And Jesus came as a building block, building up literally from the ground. If you want to be healthy, be like a child. Go back to those days. Recognize the giftedness of God in the law, in the relationships around you. The people of God became a stumbling block for Moses. I can understand that. 40 years in the wilderness with this complaining people who just want to go back to the good old days, to life as slaves in Egypt. It's amazing how the good old days get gooder as we get farther away from them. And Moses sees them as a stumbling block to his relationship with God. He goes and yells at God, the stupid people you gave me. What do you want me to do with them? In fact, I'm done with them. You fix them. You deal with them. They're your people, not mine. And God's response is interesting. Instead of taking the people away, instead of letting Moses abdicate his leadership, he says, you're right. It's too much of a burden for one person. Gather 70 others around you. Share the leadership. And Moses does, and they continue on the journey. I find these days, it's so easy with all the divisiveness, with all the rhetoric, with all the bitterness and nastiness in the world, to become a stumbling block to others. There are days when I succumb to it all and lash out. And what's fascinating to me is it's in those moments that God surrounds me with that great company of hosts. And somebody steps up and says, Pastor, remember who you are. You're called to be above this stuff. Oh, yeah. Delete that post. We can be stumbling blocks, or we can become building blocks. As I look at the world, there's plenty of stumbling blocks out there. Maybe it's time to step up and become the building blocks that God has called us to be.